Maplewood Mews seemed like a model of American suburban tranquility, a horseshoe-shaped street lined with identical houses, all painted in soothing pastel hues. Manicured lawns, spaced at uniform intervals, featured neat flower beds and carefully trimmed hedges. Neighbors exchanged nods while retrieving mail, and the occasional whir of a lawnmower was the loudest disruption on most afternoons. Yet beneath these pristine facades, there lay a less harmonious reality. The local homeowners association, HOA, enforced strict rules on everything from fence heights to permissible seasonal decor. Most residents sighed and complied, reluctant to provoke the formidable presence of Marjorie Arling, a middle-aged woman who, behind closed doors, was often called Karen for her overbearing ways. Marjorie served as one of the HOA's most zealous board members, patrolling the sidewalks each morning, clipboard in hand, eyes roving for any unsightly violation. Rumors circulated about her fondness for confrontation. One resident claimed she once slipped a note under his door at midnight, scolding him for leaving a porch light on too long. Another insisted she spent more time on inspection rounds than her own day job, whatever that might be. If asked directly, Marjorie boasted that she was preserving Maplewood Mews property values, as though this justified her intrusive behavior. Into this tense environment, the Carpenter family arrived. They purchased the cozy yellow home at the far end of the street, enthralled by the tidy landscaping and quiet setting. Elaine and Michael Carpenter, along with their toddler daughter Mia, envisioned an idyllic childhood for their little one. Weekend barbecues, outdoor play, and friendly block parties. They had no inkling that the woman known as Karen was about to target them, and more specifically, their daughter's simple, pop-up play tunnel. Elaine and Michael Carpenter were a warm-hearted couple in their early 30s. Elaine worked as a freelance graphic designer. Michael was a middle school teacher. Both cherished the idea of raising Mia in a safe, congenial suburban neighborhood. Maplewood Mews, with its quiet lanes and neat lawns, appeared a perfect choice. Mia, an exuberant 2-year-old with curly hair and bright eyes, loved anything that let her crawl, hide, or explore. Before moving, she had adored the indoor pop-up tunnels at her old daycare, cheerful, collapsible tubes of fabric that provided endless amusement. On a whim, Elaine found a child-sized garden-themed tunnel on sale and decided it would be perfect for backyard fun. Once settled into their new house, the Carpenters unpacked the colorful tunnel and placed it on the lawn. The first time Mia saw the tunnel in the yard, she squealed with delight. The bright green and yellow walls, patterned with cartoon bugs and flowers, beckoned like an instant adventure. She crawled back and forth, occasionally poking her face through the circular openings. Elaine and Michael watched with joy as their daughter giggled, enthralled by her new hideaway. Neighbors passing by offered smiles, though a few wore more guarded expressions. After all, Maplewood Mews wasn't exactly known for casual acceptance of large toys on front or side lawns. Still, the Carpenters reasoned, the pop-up tunnel was no permanent structure. It was a light, collapsible plaything that Mia used daily. They had never considered it might violate any rule. Nor did they realize that their new neighbor, Marjorie Karen Arling, was scowling at the sight from a distance, already labeling it an unapproved eyesore in her mental ledger. A few mornings later, Elaine stood on the porch, sipping tea as Mia scampered in and out of the brightly patterned tunnel. The mild spring sun glowed over Maplewood Mews, and all seemed peaceful, until Marjorie Arling appeared at the Carpenter's front gate, wearing pressed khaki slacks and a severe expression. "Good morning," Marjorie said in a tone that implied the exact opposite. She nodded curtly toward the pop-up tunnel. "I've noticed that you have this item on your lawn." Elaine blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Oh, you mean Mia's play tunnel?" "Yes, she loves it. We set it up so she can enjoy the sunshine instead of being cooped up inside." Marjorie's lips thinned. "Have you reviewed the HOA guidelines regarding lawn objects? We prefer to keep yards clear of unsightly clutter. There are rules about what is permissible, statues or decorative planters, for instance. But large children's toys are typically stored out of public view." Elaine forced a polite smile, reminding herself to stay calm. "I'm sorry if it seems like clutter. It's just a pop-up tunnel for a toddler. It folds up easily, and we bring it indoors if it rains. Is that truly against the rules?" Marjorie fixed her with a pointed stare. We strive to maintain a consistent aesthetic. The guidelines were put in place so that Maplewood Mews remains visually appealing to all. If every parent left large plastic or nylon items out, the neighborhood would look like a daycare center. With that, Marjorie handed Elaine an official-looking notice, typed in neat black font on HOA letterhead. It cited improper yard usage and threatened a potential fine if the item wasn't removed in a timely manner. Mia, unaware of the tension, emerged from the tunnel, squeaking her stuffed animal in delight. Elaine felt her heart pound, both from frustration and a fierce protective instinct for her child's innocence. Marjorie gave the toddler only a brief glance, eyes flicking back to Elaine. "I trust you'll do the right thing," she said, turning sharply on her heel. As she strode away, Elaine trembled with anger, dismayed that something so harmless as a child's toy could be labeled a violation. That afternoon, Michael returned from work to find Elaine fuming in the kitchen, the notice from Marjorie laid out on the table. She explained what had happened. Michael shook his head in disbelief, setting his teacher's satchel down. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "A pop-up tunnel that can be moved at any time can't possibly be a problem. If the HOA guidelines are that strict, we'd have known before buying, right?" Elaine shrugged. The realtor never mentioned anything about banning temporary toys. But you know how HOAs can be. These big rulebooks that no one reads until there's a conflict. She sighed, stroking Mia's hair as the toddler toddled around with her building blocks. Uncertain of what to do, the Carpenters visited a few neighbors to gauge the climate. They found that most folks sympathized, though many were wary of crossing Marjorie. One elderly resident, Ms. Dugan, grimaced when asked about the potential ban. Marjorie's had a bee in her bonnet ever since the last family put a small kiddie pool out front. She complained for weeks until they got rid of it. Another family, the Marshalls, had 2 older children. Mrs. Marshall confided, "We keep our kids' bikes in the garage so Marjorie can't complain. She's relentless when it comes to so-called yard clutter. But trust me, you're not alone. Everyone's fed up with her heavy-handed approach. We just don't want to make waves." Encouraged by the knowledge that others found the rules ridiculous, Elaine and Michael decided not to fold up the tunnel permanently. They moved it to a side patch of grass that wasn't visible from the street as easily, hoping that compromise might appease the HOA. For a few days, Mia continued to enjoy her little play haven. Yet beneath the surface, the Carpenters knew this was only the start of a deeper conflict with Karen. One evening, a rumble of thunder shook Maplewood Mews. Elaine and Michael hurried to gather loose items from the yard before the downpour began. Mia's tunnel was easy enough to fold, but they decided to drape a waterproof cover over it for just a short while. The forecast predicted only brief showers, and Elaine thought the tunnel might be fine staying mostly outdoors that night. Indeed, the rain lasted barely an hour. Once it stopped, the couple put Mia to bed and relaxed. They planned to take the tunnel in before bedtime themselves, but exhaustion set in, and they both dozed off. By the time Michael remembered the tunnel, it was past midnight. "I'll grab it first thing in the morning," he murmured. Elaine, half asleep, nodded. The next day, Elaine woke early to a jarring scene. The ground around Mia's pop-up tunnel was soaked beyond what the recent rain could have caused. Even the waterproof cover had been pushed aside, as though forcibly removed. The nylon fabric of the tunnel drooped, waterlogged, and rancid-smelling. A suspiciously large puddle surrounded it, far bigger than the drizzle from the previous night would explain. When she bent down for a closer look, a sour stench overwhelmed her. Algae-like mold had already started to form on the wet seams, suggesting not just a little leftover rainwater, but an outright dousing. It was as if someone had deliberately poured gallons of water on the structure. Elaine's stomach twisted. She carefully lifted a fold of the nylon, revealing soaked stuffing in the tunnel's seam. There was no salvaging it without deep cleaning or risk to Mia's health. She called Michael over, who scowled at the damage. "This wasn't just rain," he said, crossing his arms. "It looks like someone dumped buckets of water on it overnight." Elaine felt a flash of anger and fear. "Why? Who would do that?" she asked, though a certain name, Karen, hung unspoken in the morning air. They had no proof, but the sabotage seemed targeted, too precise to be random. Mia's beloved play tunnel was now a soggy, moldy wreck, unfit for a toddler. When Elaine shared the discovery with neighbors, they reeled in shock. "That's horrible," exclaimed Ms. Dugan, offering condolences. I can't imagine who'd stoop so low, but we can guess. The older woman's voice trembled, apparently outraged that someone would ruin a child's toy out of petty malice. A small circle of residents soon learned the details, mostly families or friendly retirees who disliked Marjorie's policing of the neighborhood. The sabotage, though unproven, seemed to have her fingerprints all over it. She'd threatened action against the carpenter's yard clutter, and within days, the child's beloved tunnel was destroyed. Michael's jaw tightened. We can't prove it was her, he told Elaine in private. But we can talk to the HOA. They need to know that this kind of intimidation is happening. Yet, approaching the HOA board was tricky. Many members, though less extreme than Karen, hesitated to confront her. She wielded significant influence, often dominating discussions with references to obscure bylaw sections. Even if the carpenters filed a complaint, the best they might get was a half-hearted note condemning vandalism. Without evidence, camera footage, eyewitnesses, the board could only shrug. Elaine cradled Mia in her lap that evening, feeling heartsick that her child's simple joy had been tainted. Mia kept toddling to the patio door, confused about where her fun tunnel had gone. "Tunnel?" she asked, tilting her small head. Elaine's chest tightened with protectiveness. She knew they had to do something, not only to reclaim Mia's space, but also to push back against Karen's suffocating grip on Maplewood Mews. Rather than giving in to fear, Elaine found a surge of defiance rising within her. If she thinks she can soak a little pop-up tunnel and that'll be the end of it, she's wrong, Elaine declared to Michael one evening. Her husband nodded. "I hate feeling powerless," he admitted, running a hand over his hair. "But what else can we do? We don't want to break any rules, and we can't directly accuse her without proof." Elaine tapped her chin thoughtfully. "What if we adapt? Instead of just replacing the tunnel, we build something bigger and sturdier, something that won't be ruined by water. If we design it properly, we might not violate any regulations. And maybe it can be a communal area for kids to play, like a mini labyrinth or play zone in the yard." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You want to expand on the idea that caused us so much trouble? Karen might blow a fuse if we erect a giant structure." Elaine shrugged. "We'll do it legally. We can check with the board about permissible materials. If it's an actual yard feature with a creative design, maybe part of a landscape enhancement, she might struggle to label it clutter. We can plan it with the neighbors who also have kids or grandkids. If the HOA sees it as a communal improvement, we might get official support." The notion grew in their minds. A small, weatherproof adventure maze constructed from vinyl tubing, repurposed PVC arches, or something similarly robust. Children could crawl through interconnected tunnels or compartments. Instead of being a single piece of store-bought fabric, it would be a custom creation, properly anchored and sealed against water damage. The carpenters could even incorporate some decorative elements, fake flowers, small LED lights, or whimsical shapes, so it looked less like a toy and more like a unique garden feature. Elaine's eyes shone with newfound determination. "Let's talk to the neighbors and see if they'll help. If Karen wants to escalate, we'll show her that Maplewood Mews is bigger than her pettiness." Over the following week, the carpenters discreetly reached out to neighbors. They discovered that several families with young children had experienced similar conflicts. Punitive notes about sidewalk chalk drawings, scoldings for leaving scooters on the lawn for 10 minutes, or allegations that plastic toys were ruining the neighborhood aesthetic. One father recounted how he'd once found his son's tricycle overturned with its wheel twisted, suspecting sabotage, though he couldn't prove anything. Another mother told of how her toddler's wading pool mysteriously deflated overnight, a small slash in the vinyl. Though no one had direct evidence linking these incidents to Karen, the pattern of hostility toward children's outdoor play was too blatant to dismiss. Far from deterring the families, these stories fueled a collective resolve. "Enough is enough," declared Patricia, mother of twin preschoolers. "Our kids should be free to play in their own yards without fear of sabotage." Encouraged by the carpenter's idea, this informal coalition of parents proposed building a mini-adventure maze that kids of various ages could enjoy. Some suggested compartments shaped like small huts, each leading to a connecting tube or corridor. Others offered design tips. Patricia's husband was an engineer who could ensure it was safe yet sturdy. Another family had leftover exterior-grade paint from a home renovation, perfect for adding color and weatherproofing. To ensure compliance with HOA rules, Michael volunteered to draft an official proposal. Harriet Lane, an HOA board member known to be more open-minded, promised to review it thoroughly. If you're making a creative structure that isn't an eyesore, the board might approve, Harriet noted. It could actually add character to Maplewood Mews. Behind the scenes, rumors spread that Karen was furious about the carpenter's new plan. She purportedly told one acquaintance that public playgrounds belong in parks, not in private yards. But lacking a direct rule against large child-oriented structures, Karen found her typical strategy, vague threats and intimidation, less potent. For once, neighbors were banding together, prepared to face her head-on. After days of collaborative brainstorming, the carpenters compiled a formal design sketch. They labeled it the Adventure Maze Project. The plan featured modular tunnels, made of PVC hoops wrapped in tough, water-resistant vinyl, large enough for preschoolers and toddlers to crawl through comfortably. Mini rooms, or alcoves, each about 3 feet wide, with open ends for easy supervision. Decorative elements, weatherproof fake vines, plastic flowers, and pastel painting to blend with the neighborhood's color palette. Safety features, non-slip, grass-friendly flooring inside each segment, plus anchor points to prevent the structure from tipping or blowing away. Michael sent the proposal to Harriet Lane with a polite cover letter emphasizing the structure's educational, social, and aesthetic merits. We believe it fosters community spirit and healthy outdoor play, the letter read, while respecting Maplewood Mews standards. It's no more obtrusive than a large gazebo or a decorative arch. Harriet invited them to present at the next HOA meeting. Elaine prepared a short slideshow, highlighting how the structure wouldn't impede the street view or harm property values. The carpenters and their allies arrived that evening, hearts pounding. They expected Karen to mount a fierce opposition, but they were prepared with well-researched rebuttals, city code references, and even a handful of supportive letters from neighbors. In the small community center room where the HOA met, chairs lined up facing a long table for the board members. Karen was already there, arms folded, a frosty glare in her eyes. Harriet introduced the carpenters. Elaine stood, laptop in hand, and began her presentation. She outlined the positive impact of safe, creative play for children. She showed design mock-ups that looked more like whimsical garden art than a toy. Murmurs of approval rippled through the attendees. Then Karen rose, eyeing Elaine with cold condescension. "I find this plan excessive," she pronounced. "Children do not need elaborate outdoor playgrounds in every yard. This neighborhood is not a carnival. The more we encourage large structures, the more Maplewood Mews degenerates into chaos. I urge the board to reject this distraction." Elaine inhaled, bracing for a fight. Yet Harriet calmly responded, "Karen, I see no direct violation in the proposal. They're abiding by all setback requirements, using decorative materials, and ensuring it's anchored. I don't see how this is any different from a large trellis or arbor. Unless you have a specific bylaw that prohibits modular play features, the board is inclined to consider it." Karen's mouth pressed into a tight line. She stammered about how it looked unsightly and could invite noise. But a few Boulder residents stood to defend the carpenters, praising the plan as both community-minded and child-friendly. Another board member, Jerry, nodded along, remarking that Maplewood Mews had a shortage of safe play spaces. Within half an hour, the board voted. They unanimously granted the carpenters conditional approval to construct the Adventure Maze, pending final inspection for safety. Elaine nearly exhaled in relief, tears stinging her eyes. Karen, seething, snatched her binder and stormed out. A hush lingered. Then Harriet led a round of applause for the carpenters' initiative. Victory, tentative but momentous, was theirs. Buoyed by the HOA's green light, the carpenters and their neighbors lost no time gathering materials. Patricia's engineer husband, Dan, drafted a more detailed blueprint, ensuring each tunnel segment could lock into place. The plan included sturdy PVC pipes for the frames, cut in arcs and connected with T-joints to create semicircular tunnels. Waterproof vinyl sheets to wrap around the frames, purchased at a discount from a local hardware store that supported community projects. Bright outdoor paint to decorate the exterior and incorporate whimsical patterns. Anchors or stakes hammered into the ground at intervals to keep the structure stable. Volunteers signed up for weekend work sessions. Children watched excitedly as parents measured, cut, and assembled the pieces in driveways and garages. The communal spirit was palpable. Even Ms. Dugan, who had no small children, sewed decorative fabric flowers to attach along the vinyl surfaces, giving each tunnel a storybook charm. During these preparations, Karen walked by several times, eyes narrowed at the bustle of activity. She never spoke, but her disapproval radiated. The neighborhood, however, had rallied around the carpenters. People who ordinarily wouldn't have challenged Karen's iron grip now felt emboldened. Her attempts at intimidation had backfired, galvanizing the community instead. After 2 weekends of labor, the modules were ready. One sunny Sunday morning, volunteers transported the pieces to the carpenter's backyard. The final arrangement was roughly shaped in a U formation, with multiple entrances that kids could explore. Mia's eyes sparkled as she tried a newly assembled segment. "Tunnel," she declared, voice filled with wonder. Elaine felt tears of joy, remembering how heartbreakingly short-lived Mia's original pop-up tunnel had been. On the designated construction day, families converged on the carpenter's lawn with drills, mallets, paintbrushes, and coolers of lemonade. Laughter and chatter filled the air as they linked the modules together, carefully leveling each section. The children, corralled by a few watchful adults, played in a smaller corner of the yard, squealing with anticipation each time a new segment was completed. Mid-afternoon, a hush fell. Karen had arrived, standing at the gate, her expression icy. A few volunteers stepped aside, bracing for confrontation. But Karen said nothing at first. She scanned the half-built maze, features taut. A swirl of frustration flickered in her eyes, as though the sight of neighbors collaborating so joyfully only magnified her own powerlessness. Finally, she spoke. "I trust you remember the conditions set by the board regarding noise and upkeep," she said flatly. "Any nuisance complaints will be taken seriously." Michael, sweaty from hammering stakes, managed a civil reply. "Yes, we're following the guidelines. Everything's anchored, painted, and we'll keep the yard tidy." Karen sniffed. "Humph. Just know that if children leave their toys scattered beyond the structure, I'll have grounds to file a complaint." She turned on her heel and strode off. The group exchanged weary looks. Her hostility was no surprise. Yet they pressed on, refusing to let her dampen the excitement. By dusk, the adventure maze stood complete, a whimsical labyrinth of tunnels, ramps, and small alcoves, shining with fresh paint. Elaine and Michael gazed upon the finished project, hearts swelling. Mia scuttled through one corridor, giggling, soon joined by other kids who squealed in delight. The structure was more than a toy. It was a symbol of resilience and cooperation. For all of Karen's sabotage, they had turned the setback into something grander than anyone had imagined. Word spread quickly that the adventure maze was ready. The next weekend, the carpenters invited neighbors for a casual, unveiling party, complete with homemade cookies, lemonade, and guided tours of the labyrinth. Parents arrived with cameras, eager to see their kids crawl, run, and play in the newly finished structure. Even some childless residents came out of curiosity, intrigued by the transformation of what began as a single toddler's play tunnel. Music played softly in the background, a festive atmosphere contrasting with Maplewood Mew's usual hush. Mia led the way, showing others how to navigate the tunnels. Each segment bore a whimsical paint job, polka dots, stripes, or floral patterns. Ms. Dugan's sewn flowers dangled from the archways like vines in a secret garden. Michael noted Harriet Lane from the HOA board chatting with neighbors, apparently pleased by the positive reception. Elaine overheard Harriet remark, "This is exactly the sort of creative solution that keeps Maplewood Mews vibrant. A perfect example of turning constraints into something wonderful." No one saw Karen that afternoon. If she was peeking from behind her curtains, she missed an outpouring of community spirit that left many neighbors smiling. For families, it became a highlight. "Finally, something for the kids to do locally," said a grateful parent. The event wrapped up with warm feelings all around, a testament that Maplewood Mews could unite when faced with adversity. Despite the project's success, Karen did not relent. A few days after the unveiling, the HOA board received a formal complaint from her, citing excessive child noise from the carpenter's yard. She called the structure an unlicensed daycare facility and insisted the board impose restrictions, limiting usage hours or requiring the carpenters to remove certain brightly colored segments, visible above the fence line. Harriet promptly notified Elaine and Michael of Karen's complaint. "It's quite a stretch," Harriet wrote in an email. "We have no bylaw about the color of outdoor play equipment. As for noise, our standard quiet hours are after 9 p.m. on weekdays. Unless kids are shrieking at midnight, she has no case." Nevertheless, Karen's complaint triggered an HOA review, meaning an inspector had to come out and assess the adventure maze. The Carpenters were cooperative, welcoming the official to examine everything. The inspector found no violations of safety or aesthetics. Indeed, the final report read, "The structure is well maintained, adheres to setback requirements, and poses no undue nuisance. Recommended for continued approval." Furious at this outcome, Karen escalated to a threat of public nuisance if any child's laughter or play was audible from the street. But the HOA, guided by Harriet, was unmoved. They noted that normal daytime children's play was not a violation of any rule or local ordinance. Karen's complaints, once formidable, now sounded like petty grumbling. With each official rejection, her authority waned. Meanwhile, the adventure maze became a beloved feature. Families coordinated playdates at the Carpenter's yard, taking turns supervising. The older kids guided younger ones through the labyrinth, forging new friendships in the process. Even the marshal's teenage daughter volunteered to do maze tours for toddlers on weekends, collecting small donations for a local children's charity. In the midst of this renewed community spirit, neighbors began quietly sharing tips to prevent sabotage, installing motion sensor lights or cameras in their yards. Ms. Dugan told the Carpenters she'd stay vigilant at night. "If I see a certain someone lurking with buckets of water again, I'll call you straight away," she said with a wry smile. Elaine felt immense gratitude for the wave of support. While Karen glowered from a distance, the rest of Maplewood Mews blossomed in solidarity. Simple gestures, like someone offering to mend a small tear in a tunnel covering, or a neighbor donating leftover paint, solidified the sense of unity. Children's laughter echoed across the yard most afternoons, a cheerful soundtrack that replaced the previous hush of compliance. Of course, not every single resident joined the cause. A small handful remained aloof, either wary of antagonizing Karen or convinced that children's toys did mar the neat, uniform look. But they were outnumbered by those who enjoyed seeing life and color in Maplewood Mews. The Carpenter's yard, once threatened, had become a magnet for neighborly goodwill. One balmy night, around midnight, Ms. Dugan peered out her bedroom window. She often had trouble sleeping and found watching the quiet street oddly soothing. The glow of a street lamp illuminated a solitary figure near the Carpenter's fence. Ms. Dugan squinted, her heart quickening. Someone was crouching, holding what looked like a container. Alarmed, she lifted her phone and dialed Elaine. Within minutes, Elaine and Michael, now wide awake, flipped on their backyard security light and stepped outside. The bright floodlight revealed Karen, standing near the fence with a plastic bucket. She froze, caught in the glare. "What are you doing, Ms. Arling?" Michael called, voice tense. He walked forward, phone in hand, while Elaine stood in the doorway with a camera ready. Karen sputtered, dropping the bucket, which clattered on the ground. This is not what it looks like. I was just..." Michael approached calmly but firmly. "Trespassing again? Planning to drench the maze with water?" Karen's face reddened. "I was verifying if your structure is within the property line," she retorted, though her voice quivered. "I have every right." "You have no right to be here at midnight," Elaine interrupted. "We have a clear boundary. This is private property." The security camera overhead blinked, capturing the entire encounter. Karen, flustered, retreated toward the sidewalk. She hurled back an insult about them, turning the neighborhood into a playground. Then, with a final glare, she disappeared into the darkness. Michael picked up the bucket. Sure enough, it was half filled with water. The stench suggested stagnant water, possibly from some neglected outside container. The couple felt a mixture of relief and anger. Karen's pettiness knew no bounds. At least this time, they had tangible evidence of her malicious intent. As they turned off the security light, Elaine exchanged a determined glance with Michael. "She won't get away with this again," she murmured. The next day, armed with the security footage, Elaine and Michael marched to Harriet Lane's home. They explained the midnight incident, playing the video on Michael's phone. Harriet's expression hardened. "This is more than a nuisance. It's trespassing with intent to damage property. I'll bring this to the HOA board immediately. It's time we take formal action. At the following HOA meeting, Harriet presented the footage. The board members, previously lukewarm on confronting Karen, were appalled at the blatant sabotage attempt. One even muttered, "We can't allow an HOA rep to harass neighbors, especially with such proof." Karen, uncharacteristically silent, sat at the opposite end of the table, posture rigid, face paling. In a swift decision, the board passed a formal reprimand against Karen, suspending her from certain enforcement duties pending an investigation. They also levied a fine for trespassing. Though the HOA lacked the power to impose criminal charges, Harriet warned Karen that the Carpenters could easily escalate to local law enforcement. "If you set foot on their property like that again, they have every right to call the police," Harriet said pointedly. Karen fumed, attempting to defend herself by claiming she was protecting property values. But the board dismissed her excuses. They insisted that repeated sabotage and intimidation of a family, especially one with a toddler, was indefensible. Facing the board's rebuke, Karen's influence in Maplewood Mews eroded further. Neighbors who once quailed under her gaze now openly criticized her. She left the meeting in a fury, while Elaine and Michael received handshakes from supportive residents. Despite Karen's animosity, the adventure maze carried on. In fact, the fiasco only increased its popularity. Harriet proposed that Maplewood Mews host a small community day in the Carpenter's yard, inviting families to enjoy the labyrinth while also discussing other local initiatives. The board, minus Karen, voted in favor. It was a symbolic gesture, showing that Maplewood Mews celebrated child-friendly spaces. On the appointed Sunday, the Carpenters and a handful of volunteers decorated the maze with streamers and placed a sign reading, "Welcome to the Maplewood Mini Maze." Kids from around the block spilled into the yard, dashing through tunnels, popping out of hidden alcoves, squealing in delight. Parents mingled, sipping lemonade and chatting about everything from school schedules to gardening tips. Michael set up a small photo booth at the maze exit, capturing candid shots of children beaming proudly after conquering the labyrinth. Elaine found herself near tears once more, but this time from pure gratitude. She reflected on how their original pop-up tunnel, destroyed so callously, had indirectly led to this wonderful communal experience. Watching from afar, Ms. Dugan grinned. She turned to Harriet and quipped, "Never thought I'd see Maplewood Mews so lively. Perhaps we owe a twisted thanks to Karen for making this happen." Harriet chuckled. "In a strange way, yes. Her sabotage spurred us to come together, turn something small into something remarkable." Karen's curtains remained closed that day. Some neighbors suspected she was still in her house, seething. But the joyous celebration in the Carpenter's yard no longer revolved around her. Maplewood Mews had moved on, forging a new spirit of camaraderie that outshone one person's negativity. In the weeks that followed, Karen's isolation grew. Residents no longer heeded her stern letters or veiled threats. The HOA board, led by Harriet and others, rescinded many of Karen's more draconian rules that weren't even properly ratified, such as no sidewalk chalk or no visible child's toys in the yard for more than 1 hour. They aimed to keep Maplewood Mews orderly, but also more realistic for families. Rumors swirled that Karen might be planning to sell her house. Some claimed they'd seen a real estate agent's car in her driveway. Others reported that Karen had mentioned finding a more suitable neighborhood where children don't run amok. Whether or not she truly intended to leave remained uncertain, but the possibility elicited little sadness among the neighbors who once tiptoed around her demands. Meanwhile, the adventure maze endured a few minor repairs, repainting scuffed sections, replacing a torn vinyl panel after a summer storm. Parents kept a watchful eye for any further sabotage attempts, but Karen appeared to retreat into sullen passivity. When she passed on the sidewalk, she averted her gaze from the Carpenters, as if acknowledging her defeat. Elaine sometimes reflected on how their family's ordeal mirrored the broader challenges of living under an oppressive HOA figure. She recalled the initial intimidation, the heartbreak of seeing Mia's original tunnel ruined, and the solidarity that blossomed afterward. The maze itself was the physical embodiment of turning adversity into opportunity. Now 3 years old, Mia treated the maze like a second home. She'd invite friends from preschool to explore its twists and turns. Elaine occasionally added seasonal decorations, paper pumpkins in the autumn, sparkling garlands in winter. Through it all, the maze became a fixture of Maplewood Mews, so well integrated into the yard that it was as if it had always been there. Patricia's twins, along with several other children on the street, began calling themselves Maze Explorers, forming an informal play club. Each weekend, they discovered new ways to navigate the tunnels, sometimes adding pillows or tiny flags, squealing whenever they discovered a hidden corner. In a neighborhood that once felt stifled by uniformity and unwritten rules against childlike whimsy, the maze brought color, laughter, and a sense of freedom. Mia, though too young to fully grasp the significance of what had happened, seemed to sense the maze was special. She proudly showed it off to visiting grandparents, beaming whenever they remarked on how imaginative the structure was. Michael found himself daydreaming about future expansions, a small slide, or a toddler-sized lookout tower. Elaine teased that they might end up building an entire backyard wonderland. The maze also attracted the attention of a local blogger covering suburban DIY transformations. She visited, snapped photos, and published a glowing write-up titled, "From Sabotage Tunnel to Child's Adventureland: How One Family Transformed a Neighborhood." The article praised the carpenters' perseverance and the sense of community that sprang from adversity. Elaine laughed, half disbelieving that their personal drama had become a local interest story. Several months later, Karen's house went on the market. A discreet for sale sign appeared on her lawn, and rumors suggested she'd accepted an out-of-town job. Most neighbors simply shrugged. She had long since withdrawn from local events and rarely showed up at HOA meetings. Harriet, for her part, pressed on with a friendlier HOA agenda, one that included supportive guidelines for families and emphasis on neighborly respect instead of strict uniformity. On a crisp autumn evening, Maplewood Mews held its annual block party. This time, the carpenter's yard was front and center, with families bringing potluck dishes and children running around the maze as the sun dipped low. Ms. Dugan, in her usual lawn chair near the fence, smiled wistfully, remarking that she'd lived in the neighborhood for decades and had never seen such a warm sense of togetherness. Elaine, taking a momentary break from hosting duties, sat on the porch steps, reflecting on how far they'd come. She remembered that initial day when Marjorie, Karen, Arling had demanded they remove Mia's simple pop-up tunnel. The heartbreak of finding it soaked and ruined. The anger, the resolve, and the collective building of something bigger, stronger, an adventure maze that had become the neighborhood's pride. Michael joined her, handing her a glass of iced tea. "All's well that ends well," he observed, watching Mia chase a friend into the winding tunnels. Hard to believe it started with a soggy piece of fabric and a petty act. Elaine nodded. "We turned her cruelty into something good. And I think we taught Maplewood Mews that children's laughter shouldn't be stifled in the name of property value. Sometimes, a neighborhood just needs a reminder that life here should be about living, not just having perfect lawns." They clinked their glasses, hearing the delighted shrieks of kids echo from inside the maze. In that moment, Maplewood Mews felt truly alive. Its uniform veneer cracked open to reveal genuine warmth, creativity, and unity beneath. As the final rays of sun disappeared, lanterns flickered on. Neighbors mingled under the gentle glow, nibbling on potluck dishes and admiring how a confrontation with an overbearing HOA member had sparked something unexpectedly wonderful. The maze stood as a testament that no bully, no Karen, armed with water buckets or unfair rules, could drown out the joyful spirit of a determined community. And for the carpenters, especially little Mia, that was the greatest triumph of all.